Welcome, everybody, to episode 93 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, sorry. And I am coming to you from an apartment complex here in Brooklyn, New York. But no, I am not alone. Who is in this apartment complex ducking the vampires with me right now?
Well, I'm Steve Guntley, and I don't give a pig's tit for your honor. This is the podcast about gun wheelchairs, shotgun mail slots, and Jan Quadrant Vincent 16. That's because this is the podcast about Enemy Territory, a late 80s action epic that melds the Warriors with Assault on Precinct 13, with The Raid, with Death Wish, with a whole lot of conservative 80s paranoia in the best possible way. I'm excited to be getting into it. This is a representation of one of my favorite micro subgenres of siege related like action movies.
Oh yeah.
Always a lot of fun to get into. And we have a returning guest joining us, locked in this complex with us, fending off vampires, who is here with us today.
Oh, I know. It's so weird. It's like 1 minute he's on planet Arcturus, covering the Dollman universe with us. And now he's here in this apartment complex with us, dodging vampires. Eric Walkuski is back on the show again. You heard him last time on our episode on Albert Pune's Dollman from a few months back. He's back to talk Enemy Territory with us. And it's pretty awesome because, you know, we sometimes introduce the guests and then we have a conversation about how they either ended up with this movie, if they picked it themselves or if they spun the wheel. Eric, first of all, welcome back. Second of all, you picked this one, and thank you, by the way, for picking this one. But first and foremost, thanks for coming back on.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I do consider it an honor. I got to say, Jared takes this very seriously. I think we talked about doing this like 4 or 5 months ago. It was like June. Oh, yeah. And where Jared was like, all right, pick one. And I was like, oh, crap, okay. And then he's like, we're doing it in November. I was like, oh, so I got time to prepare.
It really does need to be said, if it hasn't been said before. Jared is exceptional at scheduling. He's really dogged about it. And he's had us booked out for pretty much the entire year, which is amazing. And I really appreciate the extra effort that you
guys are living in the past, man.
Yeah.
Let's just talk November this year. This is the end of January, my friend.
Right.
Oh, obviously. Yes. We're in Trump's glorious republic.
Right.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
So if you hear Thanksgiving carvings going on beyond us, that's because we're in Thanksgiving time right now.
Yeah. Avoid any, ignore any cranberry sounds that you might hear.
Yeah. And if you hear us talk about the passing of a beloved actor as if it is still very fresh, no, it's just taking us a long time to get over it.
Good timing for this one. Of the list that Jared presented me, Enemy Territory was a movie I had seen within the last 2 years, first time. And our mutual friend, Michael Gingold, was the one who introduced it to me. And he and I, and, you guys also know Abby Denson and Max Avery. We get together sometimes and watch Good, So Bad They're Good, So Good They're Bad movies. And Ging picked Enemy Territory, and that was like one of the movies where it was like, holy crap, this one's actually pretty good. I mean, it's got stuff that you can laugh at, but it's also incredibly compelling. And, Steve mentioned a whole bunch of movies that it reminds you of. I mean, movies that hadn't even come out yet. So it's kind of a trailblazer a little bit. I just really dug it, and I rewatched it again 2 nights ago, and I was like, this movie is engaging as all hell.
Yeah, you know who else I think feels this movie was engaging as hell? Stephen A. D'Souza.
Yes.
He would go on to, bring some of the spirit of this movie into a little project nobody liked the following year called Die Hard.
Yep, that's very true. It's very, very true. Yeah, there's a lot of, like I said, this is a subgenre that I really like, while also needing to acknowledge that it's not necessarily something you would call a very woke subgenre. I think it does deal with a lot of rather unfortunate tropes, and really I like to call these I'm conservative and I'm scared movies, because it's really this is reflecting a time in the 80s when people were so afraid of gangs and the idea of gang warfare that they adopted an almost supernatural kind of style. I think this movie absolutely falls into that. These are all like crazy, unkillable monsters. I think some of the Assault on Precinct 13 did this, Death Wish did this, like lots of movies were kind of playing up these tropes. And I am not a New Yorker. I've spent very little time in New York, but I know from the depiction of this era of New York in movies, it's all graffiti and roving street gangs, and they usually have some kind of theme or costume choice. They defer to a very charismatic leader in all things. Like, this is all accurate.
Roller skates for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, baseball furies everywhere. Yeah, it's a problem. Was this a? I know that this is hyper exaggerated, but was for New Yorkers, like, was the 80s a much more dangerous time, like, objectively, than it is now?
Eric, I'll field this first since you and I are both native New Yorkers.
Sure.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's silly and it's kind of over the top, but I think we talked about this on another show, maybe that was set in New York as well, but there was sort of a weird, the city was bankrupt in the 70s, famously told to fuck ourselves by Gerald Ford.
Yeah.
And then it got some of its pizzazz back during Ed Koch's first term, and it was how is he doing? Yeah, he really wanted to know that. And it got some of the tourism back, and it kind of polished its image, the city, for a little while. And then you had kind of the mid 80s, which was a weird, like, post Bernie Getz type thing where vigilantism as a subject was really popular. And then this movie would have been 87. So we would have been kind of in the just pre David Dinkins years of the city. And the thing people forget is that it was a dangerous place at this point. And aesthetically, yes, I mean, subway cars were covered in graffiti, buildings were covered in graffiti. I mean, that's really what it looked like in a lot of places. I always found like Ghostbusters to be a good representation. It's like because Ghostbusters kind of shows different sections of the city,
right?
And how they looked. It isn't like the entire island of Manhattan or boroughs looked like this Lincoln Towers looks in this movie. But I think people forget that it was on a downturn again. And I think it was like 89, 90, 91, which were like some of the worst years in terms of violent crime that the city ever had. So people love to be like, oh, the 70s was so gritty. I think the late 80s was actually worse technically if you look at crime statistics, but you're right, the vigilante, conservative vigilante nightmare was sort of, or fantasy, I guess we could call it, was definitely a mania. And Eric, you weren't too far away from me, so I'm sure you experienced the same thing, and we're the same age, so.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the mid to late 80s vaguely. I was a kid then, but as Jared said, yes, I mean, the subway cars were like when you watch Jason Takes Manhattan, like when they're in that subway car, it's just littered with graffiti. That is what it looked like. And, a lot of neighborhoods were completely different, Harlem, even the Times Square area, Williamsburg, now you could ride the train at night and feel fine. Back then it kind of was like The Purge, like, after 10 p.m. you probably shouldn't be riding the subway, or you better splurge on a cab, I mean,
there's a good chance
the Vanities, New York, where it's like one wrong turn and you're like go from a really sweet neighborhood to like a place you do not want to end up in.
You got to be really careful with the subways because 1 in 5 of them turns out to be a midnight meat train, and you have to really watch out for that.
Surprisingly, but I think the movie we were talking about was Doll Man when I was on, because that takes place in a New York that is very strange, like a bombed out.
That's a good point.
It looks like Iraq. I didn't know that New York in particular, but yeah, it was a little rough going for sure back then, and I do remember the Bernie Getz stuff and how it was kind of becoming popular to be like, what, everybody should be packing a gun.
Yeah. I've been told, as not an expert, and this sounds facetious, but I've been told that like actually a pretty good representation of the way the city was around this time is the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Which, I don't know. We'll see. People can write in and tell me about that. All I know is that I can say that this idea kind of permeated because I was growing up in very rural Colorado, okay, like very small towns in Colorado, and my mom was terrified that I was going to join a gang. This was the prevailing fear for parents in the 80s and early 90s. It went from satanic panic, which was never really a concern for my parents. They're, lapsed Catholics, and they kind of knew that was overblown. But they were really worried about me joining a gang. Now, understandably, I was in 5th grade. I was under 4 feet tall. You know, you definitely need someone like that in your street gang. You know, I can understand why they were courting me. Obviously, they were.
Well, that's the time that the Aspens Angels were ruling the cities, right?
Was Colorado known for its violent, degenerate gangs?
Not so much. I mean, not really. The worst problems that we had were like juggalos. You know, we had a juggalo gang that was like selling meth for a little while, but that's like, you know, I think my mom was still thinking of gangs very much in like a Bloods versus Crips kind of style, and I'm like, neither of them would want me, and neither of them are in this area.
Right.
I think these are a little overblown, but that was just how the media was portraying it. You know, like what was happening in New York was radiating out through the rest of the country, and LA, you know, it was kind of radiating into the middle, and there was this pervasive sense of fear. And I think these movies are kind of fun because they are capitalizing on that a little bit, but they're also making fun of it a little bit by making it so exaggerated. You look at The Warriors, which is this neon, colorful, like hellscape, you know, very hyper stylish gangs with catchphrases and choreographed routines. And it's just like, it feels nuts and it feels operatic and silly in all the best ways. And I think in its best moments, Enemy Territory is kind of doing the same thing. In a really fun way. Let's break down a little bit about this very interesting movie. Enemy Territory was released May 22nd, 1987. It's directed by Peter Manoogian. It's written by Stuart Kaminsky and Bobby Lindell. And it stars Gary Frank, Ray Parker Jr., Jan Michael Vincent, Francis Foster, Stacey Dash, Dion Richmond, Kadeem Hardison, and Tony Todd. All right, so... a little bit about the movie to begin with. There's not a whole lot to talk about because this is a story that we've encountered many, many times before. A semi-lost empire film. It was released in a very, very small theatrical run, but it was always largely designed for home video. So, you know, it's leaning into some of its derivative elements and things like that because they know it's not competing on a theatrical level. This went to video and Laserdisc after a very short run, and because of the crazy distribution rights shuffle that happened post-Empire, it was not clear who owned the movie for a long time. MGM had the VHS and Laserdisc rights, and they have let those lapse. There was never a DVD released of this. There probably never will be unless Arrow or another little indie label picks this up. I can't imagine the rights for this are expensive anymore, but they may just be lost in the ether, you know. So this does exist on YouTube. You can watch it with a little MGM watermark in the corner of your screen the entire time, but it's a pretty good quality print otherwise, all things considered. But we're back in good hands with Peter Manoogian. He's come up many times for us. I think he has a really good way of elevating 80s schlock because this is the guy who did Arena. This is the guy who did Eliminators. This is the guy who did the first Demonic Toys. You know, there's a lot of fun stuff coming from Peter Manoogian. But really, the incredible thing to talk about with this movie is the cast. Okay, so firstly, we have a whole crop of kind of like up-and-comers that we'll see in things later. Little Dion Richmond, he's going to go on and be in movies like Scream 3. He'll be on The Cosby Show. Stacey Dash in her first role, future star of one of my favorite movies, Clueless, and less famous for her Fox News appearances in recent years, which is a major bummer. So yeah, Kadeem Hardison from A Perfect World pops up as a thug named A-Train in this very briefly.
I'm gonna correct you for a second, Steve. It's from A Different World.
Oh, did I say A Perfect World? I always do that.
That's that Clint Eastwood movie, which is pretty good, by the way.
Yeah, no, I always do that.
But it's like anything like time stamping this thing, like right in the 80s. It's like you got a soap opera actor with Kadeem Hardison. So you've got Dwayne Wayne. And a soap opera actor in Gary Frank and Ray Parker Jr. together in a movie.
I have to get to those because I think there's so many interesting casts here. And Gary Frank, the lead of this movie, is kind of the least interesting of all of those. Like you said, he was a TV star in the 70s and 80s. He was a regular on a show called Family that I've never seen, but that lasted like 6 or 7 years. And he basically retired in the late 90s and is living his best life now. But yeah, some of the weird casting coups here include Ray Parker Jr. as an action lead. If you don't know that name, then you certainly know his work because he is the man who sang the theme song to Ghostbusters, a massive 80s defining hit, a huge kind of cross-sectional, massive hit for everybody. And this was a period where he was trying to kind of make that transition from pop superstar to actor. He had a handful of TV appearances, but really 1987 was his big year. He had a double whammy of Enemy Territory, of which he is kind of the action lead. And he had a role in the Fat Boys vehicle Disorderlies. And both of these movies have it in common that it's impossible to find them on DVD or really streaming anywhere. I still think Disorderlies is not streaming anywhere,
So
right?
Ray Parker Jr. is like the Ted McGinley of
He kind of
these
is.
movies.
Oh,
It's like if
He
he's
comes in and it
these
just
movies,
dies.
You'll never be able to find them. No, I want to take a minute to talk about Ray Parker Jr. because obviously everybody associates him with Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But he had a pretty fascinating career.
Yeah.
He started off as a singer in his teens and sang with like Marvin Gaye and stuff when he was a teenager. And then when he was 18, he played on Stevie Wonder's Talking Book, which is like, if you
One of
ask
the best
people,
albums
either
ever.
the first or second of like the classic period of 70s Stevie Wonder. And he plays guitar on the song Maybe Your Baby, which is a fantastic song.
Yeah.
And and then he started this band Radio when he was, I don't know, maybe 20, 21 years old. And so he was really prolific, and he played in Stevie Wonder's touring band for a while. And he was just like a guy who got around. And so he had a couple of hits with Radio and a couple solo hits before Ghostbusters 2, meaning Ghostbusters also, not Ghostbusters 2. That
Right,
hit
yeah.
belonged to Jackie Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or Bobby Brown.
that's
Yeah.
true. But I just feel like, Ray Parker Jr., he's one of those people, and there's a lot of them where it's like your brain associates with one thing, and it's like that one thing because it was such a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
But I would recommend to anyone who doesn't know any of Ray Parker Jr.'s other work to go check out his first solo album. I think the song like A Woman Needs Love is from that, which is really good. And some of the stuff with Radio. And if you've never listened to Stevie Wonder's Talking Book or Intervisions or Fulfilling This First Finale or Songs in the Key of Life, I mean, what are you even doing with yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. I mean,
I just got to interrupt real quick and say,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but when I think of Ray Parker Jr., I think of the Key and Peele sketch.
Me too. I was thinking that.
Which
Yeah.
is absolutely brilliant. And if people haven't seen that, I mean, it's making fun of him a little bit, but it's kind of lovingly, and it's friggin' hilarious.
Disturbia. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking-
Beautiful. There's a kid and a Nazi down there.
It's so good. Oh, that's so good. And really now, like, I didn't have it fully locked in my head what Ray Parker Jr. looked like because I hadn't seen that music video in forever. But Jordan Peele kind of nailed it. Yeah, he really kind of looks like him. And and you get it. You look at him here. He's like he's a good looking guy. He's charismatic. Like it's surprising it didn't really happen for him. But maybe putting him as the action lead here isn't necessarily the tightest fit. Like but it's interesting, and he jumps kind of into it, and I think he's having fun. A few other interesting people to talk about. We have to talk about Jan Michael Vincent.
That's the other 80s person. So we got Airwolf in there too.
Yeah.
A very fascinating, very sad human being. Jan Michael Vincent, honestly, like you said, if you know him today, it's probably from my earlier reference to that Rick and Morty improvised episode where they have Jan Quadrant Vincent, and they're even saying during the sketch, is it important if I know who he is to get this bit? It's like, no, you're fine. Very silly bit, but yeah, he was a real up-and-coming actor in the 70s and 80s. He was a big TV star, kind of up-and-coming movie star, very intense guy. And he was best known at around this time for the series Airwolf, I think, which lasted about 3 years, but for which he was briefly the highest paid actor on television. He was kind of up and coming and really sort of tipped to be a big movie star, but he got in his own way. He rather has kind of an infamous reputation as one of the I don't want to disparage the man too bad, but the man had a very, very serious drinking problem. Very well documented. He's spoken about it in great detail. Known for rather abusive behavior on set, known for being unreliable and kind of troubled, and also known for surviving more car accidents than most people will ever encounter in their life. He's been in so many like severe, like life-threatening car accidents because of his own doing usually, but he doesn't remember most of them.
I don't want to I don't want to make light of that kind of situation. I mean, car accidents obviously can be very serious, but I will say it's sort of like life imitating art, because for me, the thing that even more than Airwolf, the thing I remember Jan Michael Vincent for is the last 5 minutes of the Michael Winner movie, The Mechanic.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the most hilarious endings to a movie ever. And he's in a car that explodes in that one. And so hopefully he wasn't in another car that exploded, but I know he had a rough life, and he brought a lot of that to the set with him.
He did.
Territory.
Yeah, it was a problem for
him.
him.
The Mechanic, and he's like charismatic. He's like really like, you're like, this guy's got a movie star written all over him. He's going toe to toe with Bronson. And it's impressive performance. And I had to look it up because I thought Airwolf was earlier, but Airwolf actually ended like a year before Enemy Territory.
Yeah. It was just it was a brief phenomenon.
Still kind of current in like the pop culture mindset, I would say.
I think that was one of those shows that got canceled not because it wasn't successful, but because it was so expensive. Like, it's difficult to get a lot of aerial photography and like still make it look good. And Jan Michael Vincent was getting a really high salary. We did lose Jan Michael Vincent about 5 years ago. He'd been out of the public eye for a long time. He lost some limbs due to his various accidents and some health problems. He had a rough go of it. He had a pretty tragic life, but he's a fascinating guy if you ever want to look into him. And then finally, the other person we need to talk about here, heartbreakingly, we have to talk about Tony Todd, and we sadly have to refer to him now as the late Tony Todd. As of this recording, he only passed away only about 2 weeks ago, I think. Obviously, he's an icon for Candyman, Final Destination, all of his horror roles that he's appeared in. This is a very early role for him. He was part of the kind of dream team that made up the supporting cast of Platoon in 1986. So many people got their start on the movie Platoon. He was one of them. And all I've ever heard about Tony Todd, the man, is that he is a total gentleman. He is supposedly just kind of the nicest and chillest dude. He is a world-renowned gourmet chef. He's published cookbooks. He's judged cooking shows. He was like this very urbane, like classy guy who loved his fans and was apparently really cool to work with. We know a lot of people who have been on the show who like consider him a friend. Yeah,
absolutely.
I interviewed him years and years ago for, I can't remember what movie it was coming out, but yeah, I mean, just as you said, perfect gentleman, incredibly smart, incredibly gracious with his time, and as you were saying, anybody who's ever met him seems to feel the same way. And I was really touched by what Virginia Madsen said about him right after, because she obviously still had feelings for him, and I guess they kind of remained friends after some years. So that was really cool to see.
I mean, Candyman, truly, if you have not seen Candyman, it is an iconic performance, and that is genuinely a movie that still really scares me and really upsets me. I think it's exceptionally well done.
And his performance in the Night of the Living Dead remake is really a very good performance in a movie I struggle with, but I think that's a very good performance. But we... R.I.P. Tony Todd. At least it's great to see him here playing a charismatic gang leader named the Count, which is just an amazing turn for him to do.
He's sinking his fangs into all of the scenery in this movie in the best way possible.
The one last behind the scenes person I wanted to shout out was the cinematographer here is Ernest Dickerson, who absolutely fucking rules. I love Ernest Dickerson. He was a great cinematographer throughout the 80s and 90s. He was Spike Lee's guy on like Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X and a lot of his best movies. And then he went on to a long directorial career himself. He's the man responsible for Juice, and he's the man responsible for Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, an absolutely gonzo, super fun movie. I was surprised to see he actually has not directed a film since the 2001 Snoop Dogg vehicle Bones, which is also a lot of fun. But he's one of the most prolific TV directors in the business right now. Pretty much any TV show he's had a hand in it. He directed like the bulk of The Walking Dead and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, just want to shout out Ernest Dickerson. He rules. Always been a big fan of his work.
Yeah, and I think he was a DP on a bunch of Tales from the Dark Sides. And
he sure was, and some Tales from the Crypts too. Yeah.
And this movie, so when this movie started, it was a script that Debbie Dion really loved, that Charles
Yeah.
Band didn't particularly care for because it was not filled with tiny terrors, which is not really a surprise to anyone.
Unless you
But-
count the young gang members.
Yes.
They are tiny terrors. It was a script called Show No Mercy, and it was coincidentally, we're talking about Tony Todd, was originally supposed to be set in Cabrini Green.
Oh, yeah.
And so
And Cabrini Green was kind of the shorthand for like the projects. That was the one that was in the news
Right.
all the time. It's in Chicago, and it's one of the ones that's kind of known for being one of the most impoverished areas.
Yeah.
I believe, as depicted in the new Candyman movie, that area has been totally gentrified now. But
Right.
Yeah, but they ended up changing it to New York. And once Stuart Kaminsky came on, I mean, this is a guy who worked on Once Upon a Time in America,
yeah,
which is like, if you see the real Sergio Leone director's cut or 4-hour cut that exists, not the theatrically released, is like one of the greatest movies ever made.
oh yeah,
And I love that connection is made too. But the funniest thing about this to me is, like, as we're talking about Ernest Dickerson and what he brings as a DP to this movie, originally Peter Manoogian was sent to meet Tim Kincaid, and Tim Kincaid was supposed to work as a producer on this movie. He has a producing credit.
yeah, he does.
But what happened was basically they met, they went over what they were going to do and what movie they thought they were going to make and for what amount of money. Tim Kincaid, obviously famously someone who can get a movie done in 5 days for 50 grand. And basically,
whether he should or not, yeah,
right. And he apparently had said, my idea for this movie is to have my DP work on it. Peter Manoogian didn't really want that, and they felt like, no, this is something that's going to take more time. It's going to take more money. Tim Kincaid ultimately sort of walked away from it, but still got his name as a producing credit. But the producer, Hope Perello, and Peter Manoogian were able to bust this thing out for 800 grand, which is a pretty sizable budget for an Empire movie. But I just think, like, that was then Manoogian who brought in Ernest Dickerson as DP. And I just think, like, when you look at the movie we were given here of Enemy Territory, like, imagine this movie on Mutant Hunt's budget and shot by the same person. It's like the stars really had to align for us to get the movie that we got here, because it had a lot going against it. And then everything sort of came together in the way that I felt like was really harmonious. Like, we got, some great LA shooting doubling for New York, plus some New York on location shooting, plus Ernest Dickerson and Peter Manoogian, a little bit more money, a little bit more time to make this movie. And I think because of that, we got a movie that's quite good. But then I think
a
about,
lot
like,
of fun.
the Tim Kincaid stuff, and I'm like, this could have been something that would, I mean, it probably would be equally as hard to find, but it would also be 10 times harder to look at.
Yeah, no, I was very happy that the print that exists is as watchable as it is. Of course, it is. It's ripped from a VHS, so it has some degradation, but this looks pretty good. It's got a consistent visual style. It's got a great soundtrack. And I think the performances generally are very good. Like I said, I think Ray Parker Jr. is maybe a little miscast. He's fun as kind of this like roguish, action-y hero guy, but we never actually learn much about this character and like why he's so capable and why he kind of just like drops into the movie and then is just along for the ride the whole rest of the time.
Well, they do throw in that he was in Vietnam, so that kind of is just like, oh, that's his backstory. He's got terrible taste in women, because the woman he's with, once he's outside of her apartment, she will not let him back in because she knows the vampires are roaming the hallways. And I'm like, God damn, Ray, you gotta check in on that. But I mean, I think he mainly functions as like a sounding board for our kind of lame lead, Barry. And whenever Barry's having a problem, Ray Parker has like a rejoinder or a comment to say, and there's a lot of like one-liners, and in terms of that, he's like perfectly acceptable. Yeah.
I mean, and it's fun to get to kind of see the cast of characters that they encounter throughout this building. There's a lot of stock characters. There's kind of the saintly old lady, and there's the crazed Vietnam vet with a gun wheelchair. That old trope.
Guess who plays him?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's got a crazy apartment too. He's got like aluminum siding on the inside of his walls, like everywhere. He's got this little like gun slot in his door, and he's just kind of like a crazy. Around. Yeah, apparently Ray Parker Jr. says Jan Michael Vincent was extremely drunk during the shooting of this and was crashing his wheelchair into him all the time intentionally. Yeah.
One of my favorite lines of the movie is they're talking about the cats. I don't know where he's getting all these cats from, but he uses stray cats to eat his food and see if it's poison because he's, of course, crazy paranoid.
Yeah.
And one of his lines is "fuck my mangy cat," and then he shoots at the cat with a machine gun, which I'm like, Jesus, I would also get out of there. I'd rather take my chances with the vampires at that point.
It's unhinged, but really, for those who aren't watching, the kind of basic premise is that there's this kind of milquetoast insurance agent who is behind on his quota, and so he's sent out to this very dangerous apartment building to get one last payment from this little old lady. On his way out the door, he runs afoul of the gang that runs the building. They call themselves the Vampires. They're led by Tony Todd. They've got all kinds of weird rituals and kind of a messianic kind of cult status going on. An altercation happens, and the security guard and a young boy, a member of the Vampires, is killed in what I take as a direct nod to Assault on Precinct 13, a movie that also famously killed a small child early in the going. And then it's just the insurance agent has to team up with a local phone repair guy played by Ray Parker Jr., who tries to help him escape from the building, but the vampires have everything locked down and they are evaluating everybody. Yes. So, it's a fun setup for a premise. We have a lot of different characters that kind of weave in and out and join the gang. We have Stacey Dash as the young girl. We have a little boy played by Dion Richmond, who's like smarter than everybody and knows ways out of the building. And then we have crazy old racist, bigoted Jan Michael Vincent with all of his guns, but he's like a noble racist, I guess. I don't know how they're painting him. He's like a super racist, nasty character, but he's also
an anti-hero, I guess.
Yeah.
He's willing to help them out, but he seems just as willing to maybe kill them if he has to.
I'm glad they didn't over season the broth here with Jan Michael Vincent. I think he comes in. It's really more of like a supporting character, and they don't overdo it with him. So it allows you to kind of still be pretty fun. But I mean, I actually think, Gary Frank as the lead has kind of the least satisfying character here, but I actually think he's quite good at playing the shock and the trauma of like what's going on. He is just an extremely dorky, like normal guy.
He's nebbish.
He's a nebbish, absolutely. I mean, there's a great line where they ask, it's like, "Oh, well, I bet you drive a Volvo." He's like, "Actually, my ex-wife got the Volvo in the divorce."
Yeah,
like that's really funny.
Well, apparently he studied with like Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, which is like one of the most prestigious places you could possibly learn how to act. So, I mean, he's got it. And I think you referenced it. Like, there's a scene where he kills somebody. And I think it's, to the movie's credit, it takes almost like a minute to have him, like, while he's like recovering from the shock. And then Ray Parker's like trying to talk him off the ledge, so to speak. And I was like, this is like a better scene than you would think in a movie like this,
Yeah, there's a really interesting way that part is framed where he kills somebody, and then the movie does a really interesting thing, which it takes a minute for Ray Parker Jr. to calm him down, but the way he calms him down is by reminding him, hey, I'm the person who's helping you, because in that moment, I do think one of the qualities of Gary Frank's character is that to him, all of the people in this building probably look the same. And so he's sort of in that moment, like not sure if he is in immediate danger. And I think it's interesting to have Ray Parker Jr. kind of shake him and say to him, like, no, I'm the person, like, we literally just like climbed down a bunch of windows on a bed sheet together. Like, I'm the person who is helping you, like, as sort of startled as you might be in this moment. And I thought that was an interesting way to handle it. I think it was kind of, the politics of this movie, I would say, are, how should I put this? They're inconsistent and maybe questionable at best and problematic at worst.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think they do make an interesting, so the Vampires, should be noted, is an entirely black gang.
Yeah.
And What I think is interesting about this time period is like when you would watch Death Wish movies, which this is like sort of like Death Wish in a building. Usually the gangs are like multicultural. Like you'll see like white guys, Spanish guys, black guys, and like so it's definitely a choice of this movie to make sure it's like they're all black and they're gunning for the white guy who they keep calling the Ghost, and then they keep calling Ray Parker the what they keep calling like the Blood Trader or something like that.
Trader,
yeah. And so I think it's like indeed problematic, and when you watch it in today's context, it's like oof. But like, I almost have to give the movie credit for like kind of going all the way with that stuff.
Well, and there's some interesting stuff going on with Gary Frank's character too. His character is not really coded as racist, but he is sort of a doofus when it comes to issues like this. Like there's a moment where he's trying to get the mother to let her little boy help them escape, and he offers her $300, and she says, "Mister, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but you can't buy little black boys anymore."
Right.
And he has this look on his face like, oh, Jesus, I'm an idiot. Like
right.
It's clearly, I think he is being depicted as somebody who is out of his depth and ignorant about what this culture actually is. And I think it's also crucial to this movie that the other hero characters are black people as well. You know, not everybody in the building is part of the gang. But
maybe like the only white person in the movie.
but I will agree. It's like it's a little inconsistent. The overarching politics of this movie, if it has any, I'm kind of willing to think like they didn't think about it that deeply.
Yeah, or maybe it is like maybe there's something beneath the surface about systemic racism and its effect on people and cultures and generations and stuff like that. It's just not really fully explored because this is a cheap exploitation movie.
Absolutely.
When it comes down to it. And it's also, we mentioned earlier, Steve, it's a siege movie.
Yeah.
I fucking love siege movies.
I do too.
Like,
oh my God.
It's one of my
The Raid might be one of the best action movies ever made. It may be the best action movie ever made. And that's basically the same reference to this. Yeah.
Right. And it's like watching a movie like this, it's like, okay, well, now I'm in the mood to watch more siege movies. So I don't know if you've ever seen this one. I know it's on Midnight Pulp and probably on Tubi. I think you could find it under just the name Siege, but it was a movie called Self-Defense by Paul Donovan and Maura O'Connell. Like that's a Canadian, I believe, like a Canucksploitation movie with a really interesting premise, which is that there's a bunch of like sociopaths and violent guys who go in a gay bar, and then a character runs away and again has to kind of creatively get through apartment buildings to get away from the people who are tormenting this bar. Like there's that movie, and like we said, there's the Empire movie where it's sort of like I think there's a whole subgenre of just like Robert Forster pushed to the edge.
Yeah.
And it's like Walking the Edge, and then Bill Lustig's Vigilante, which is another one too.
You'll push me to the edge again.
Well,
I gotta kill you. That's my Robert Forster.
It was, what? It wasn't bad. I thought about doing a Bronson before we brought up Death Wish, and then I decided.
You don't want to do that, Pally.
Yeah,
Bronson is entirely based on the Simpsons rendition, like the weird nameless.
The Andy Griffith episode where
this is Bronson.
How about some cookies?
Yeah,
no dice.
No dice.
This ain't over.
But like, was Enemy Territory pretty different? I mean, you guys would know, pretty different movie for Empire at the time, right?
Absolutely.
They had not done anything like this, and I have to assume they were like, well, let's get a little Death Wish money because like that's when Death Wish like 3 or 4 had come out.
Yeah, it was a franchise this way. No, I think Empire mostly played around in like genre tropes. They liked action, or they liked sci-fi, they liked horror, they liked stuff like that.
Yeah.
So movies like this or The Caller are very, and even The Caller like is a sci-fi movie ultimately. But
this is a departure.
Yeah, this is
definitely a departure from what Empire was doing.
Like a straight action movie, but you can really, they're really kind of wearing the influences on their sleeve. I think you can, correct me if I'm wrong, are the end credits actually sampling from the Halloween theme?
Yes.
It sounds like they're sampling from a John Carpenter
absolutely
theme, which has got to be like nodding to Precinct 13.
Yeah, the Boogie Boys who performed the opening and closing song, I think. Yeah, and that closing song, it definitely is sampling John Carpenter's Halloween theme, 100%.
Yeah, so they're open about their influences here at the very least. But they're like a lot of Empire movies. I think this movie does sag a little bit in the middle because you sort of need to stretch it out between set pieces, and there's only so many times you can show somebody like running down a hallway and trying to get into another apartment and then hoping they'll let them in. Like we go back to that well a couple of times. But it's
I was just thinking, like, it might as well be the same hallway for all we know. Like, they might be just using one hallway and running down it like 15 different times.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The same, like, stairwells, the same.
They're pulling a what's the movie? Doom, the Doom live action version with The Rock. They just had one hallway and they just kept shooting it from different angles.
Right.
I don't like what you're implying about these productions.
Oh yes, you seem to be assuming that there was some kind of corners cut in the production of a movie like this. No, but I think that's the thing that Peter Manoogian really brings to the table. Like he does make these very cheap, silly movies look very professional. I mean, Arena is a bit of a different case because they were actually pumping a lot of money into that movie, but Eliminators like looks better than it needs to. Sonic Toys looks better than it needs to. I think he has a good eye and he has a good way of making these a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, and obviously he's got range because this does not make you think of demonic toys necessarily.
No, not at all.
Dungeon Master,
No, and I think even so, I think the way the subject matter is handled, I mean, we've talked about how the politics of it are kind of confusing and it's very broad and there are definitely stereotypes and tropes and things like that. But I will say one thing I give this movie credit for is that as much as it kind of scratches the surface of kind of the unpleasantness of the racial politics, this movie is nothing compared. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Death Wish series.
Where I've never seen any of them. Yeah.
So Death Wish 2, so Death Wish 3 is essentially a cartoon.
That Death Wish 3 is the one I say start with.
Yeah, it's a cartoon. I would say skip. So I'm probably going to upset a few people by saying this, and I'm okay with it. I think Death Wish 2 is a disgusting movie.
Yeah, it's really gross.
It's a movie that really, it's almost like Michael Winner is really reveling in the horrific nature of the sexual assault in those movies to try to turn the tables and have it be kind of a, you really want to see Bronson go back and destroy all of these gang members for what they're doing. But the way that the violence against Bronson's daughter in Death Wish 2 is presented, then to manipulate the audience into rooting for this vigilante, it's just a disgusting movie. It's an ugly looking movie. The LA in that movie is so drab and uninteresting compared to the outer LA in New York in this movie. And Bronson is sleepwalking through that movie, and it's bad. And I was thinking about how, you can do a callback to Death Wish, I think, with the gangs, but it's not really fair, I think, to compare it to the Death Wish sequels, because I think Death Wish 2 is just such a disgusting movie, and then Death Wish 3 is a cartoon.
Yeah. And
Death Wish 4 is actually better than Death Wish 2 and 3.
Okay. I mean, all I knew is that Death Wish 2 was one of Roger Ebert's rare 0-star ratings, which he reserved exclusively for movies that he found morally offensive.
Right.
It reminded me of this one at times because there's a weird kind of electronic score composed by Jimmy Page.
Right.
And I guess Jimmy Page was neighbors with Michael Winner.
No,
and was like, it was like and it's not a particularly good score. And then I think it's actually, maybe John Paul Jones did Death Wish 3 score. It's like a weird connection between Michael Winner and the members of Led Zeppelin.
Oh, well, strange.
Well, 3 was shot in London, I believe, too.
Yeah.
So that's London subbing for New York. And that's another bombed out, looks like Dick Cheney had just sent a few missiles to it.
Well, and that one's Michael Winner also, and that's why the whole R-word scene with Marina Sirtis is so graphic and off-putting in that movie as well. And then the fourth movie is J. Lee Thompson, who directed Bronson in like Murphy's Law and to Midnight and movies like that.
Oh, right, yeah.
And Midnight I can get behind.
Part 4 is more of like a mob movie, like he's in the middle of like a mob war. So like, there's thankfully no rapes and just like gross. That I remember. It's more of just like he's kind of stuck in between two warring mobs and he wipes them both out.
Yeah, and it's good for, if no other reason, for the voiceover work on the TV spot to say, "Death Wish 4, the crackdown."
Yeah.
Well,
it's got a good Danny Trejo performance too.
I mostly know that as like kind of the last action hero joke of like you're running out of immediate family members to get revenge on. So like, oh, he killed my favorite second cousin, like that's kind of what they were doing with Death Wish.
I mean, this is now turning into a Death Wish tangent, which is welcome, I suppose, in this episode.
This is the episode for it. Yeah.
But that's the hilarious thing about Death Wish 3 is it's just like he's avenging like an older couple who are neighbors. It's like not even a family anymore.
Yeah.
Or it's like they're somehow related to someone who works with Charles Bronson. It's so convoluted by that point. I mean, really the thing is like you're just looking for scenes where he's using like a bazooka launcher to just like kill 15 gang members at once. And there's the hilarious scene where there's two guys breaking into the car and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And they're like, "We're breaking into this car. What the fuck is it to you?" And he's like, "It's my car."
And then just shoots them. And like, that's it.
Dear Lord, maybe I need to do a deep dive on these.
Yeah, you skip two, though.
If you're a completist, watch Death Wish 2, but it's I can't recommend it.
Yeah, sounds unpleasant. Well, I mean, do we have any final thoughts on Enemy Territory? I mean, we've gone a lot into the cast and stuff. I don't want to go too many plot details because I think people should check this out. It's on YouTube for free. Check it out. Let it unfold. Let it wash over you. I think this is a lot of fun.
I think I just want to say Tony Todd is acting his butt off in this movie, and he's like, there's one scene where he's in the old woman's apartment, and he's just kind of ranting and raving, and it's like really, compelling stuff. And again, he's like another theater trained actor, so he's like giving his all. And I just love we don't really understand what the deal is with the vampires. It's not even made clear if they're like drug dealers or anything. They're just like a gang of guys. And they take the vampire thing very seriously because like there's a ticking clock element for them where it's like the sun is rising towards the end and they're like, "Man, we still haven't found them. Like the sun's almost up. Come on, man." And it's like, what? Like at 6 a.m. they give up? Like what's the deal?
Yeah, they hand their weapons back over to Curtis Sliwa.
Yeah. But it's a fun touch because they could have just been another random gang, but they give them some interesting flourishes. And another movie that this reminded me of that had probably 10 years to come out, 94, 93, was Judgment Night, the Stephen Hawking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I really liked that movie.
Yeah, I'm a big Judgment Night fan. And so you think, Die Hard, Judgment Night, and then you throw in some Warriors and a little bit of Death Wish, and it's just a nice cocktail.
I think Judgment Night really nailed the detail that I think a lot of these interurban gang movies miss is that most gangs are led by Dennis Leary.
Yeah.
Most inner city gangs are being led by Dennis Leary.
Yeah, it taught me that metal and hip hop are two great tastes that taste great together. Because that Judgment Night soundtrack was awesome.
That was a banger.
A flop movie with a pretty huge soundtrack. So yeah.
Well, speaking of soundtracks, I guess like if we're looking at things we want to talk about Enemy Territory, the music in Enemy Territory was primarily composed by two people, Peter German and Drew King. And Peter German is a guy who, maybe not as a composer necessarily, but has credits for some of the music for the heavy metal movie, and was also worked on Scanners and Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2 as effects guy. So he's somebody who kind of dabbled in a bunch of things. He also did music for one episode of something that I'm really curious if you guys remember this, because it was sort of a phenomenon, and it was the perfect storm of like, we need something after Care Bears. Like Care Bears was sort of like that first, like, was Care Bears created by Hallmark?
I don't remember. Think they were, but they were definitely in conversation with each other. Yeah.
So there was a property that was created, and I believe it was for greeting cards initially, and then it became a cartoon series, which I was utterly obsessed with when I was a kid, called the Get Along Gang.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, well, it was like the Get Along Gang. They were like there was like a cat who was wearing like a tracksuit. There was a Montgomery Moose who was like the moose with like a Letterman shirt on.
Right. Yeah.
There was one of them was on roller skates because that might have even been the same cat with the tracksuit on. I might be confusing that with Mongo from the other one from Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats. Wow, these words I'm saying.
We are going deep on this one. Oh my God.
Yeah, this is a horror
I just-
podcast, remember?
I just want to throw out about the music too. Some of the credited composers are Richard Kaczynski, who would go on to do a lot of Full Moon stuff, including like Killjoy and Killer Eye, all of that stuff. And Sam Winans, who is the we mentioned Roger Ebert. That's the person who composed the Siskel and Ebert theme song.
Yeah.
Well, I have to take credit for this because I messed it up. What I did was I meant to pull up Richard Kaczynski and I pulled up the composers of the movie Siege by mistake.
Oh, I see. I see what happened.
There is
Okay.
no Get Along Gang connection here. But the fact that we're now talking about Richard Kaczynski and a lot of the stuff that he also did the music for something that came out around the same time as the Get Along Gang, which was a cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue.
Yes, of course.
Also the Pound Puppies and the Legend of Big Paw.
Oh, well, there you go.
Which I had on VHS too. I mean, he also did Subspecies 2 and 3, and I think is responsible for that kind of Subspecies main theme that we really like.
Yeah, he did the original trilogy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, actually, no, he did all of them. Yeah.
Well, you know what? It was kind of a fortuitous mistake that I made that really kind of took us off the rails there into 80s cartoons with serious messages.
Oh my God, yeah, I'm glad
actually all the same.
Get Along.
They're all kind of the same though, because I mean, the guy Sam Winans composed like Lizzie McGuire and
lots of Disney stuff.
So there's a lot of like cartoons in here, happily ever after fairy tales. So like, you know.
Well, I'm thinking maybe the vampires just needed some cartoon all-stars to the rescue in their life.
I think that's it. Yeah, they just needed Slimer to tell them not to do drugs. Yeah, I think that was a big
that's what put me on the right path.
I mean, he already knows Ray Parker Jr. It's an easy get.
There you go.
They're like they're buddies. Yeah. Well, I think that's as good a place as any to end our enemy territory conversation.
You came for enemy territory. You got Pound Puppies and Death Wish 2.
Look at that.
This is making someone of a really specific age really happy.
This is a real melange of obscure nostalgia. And I'm
alienating 90% of our listeners, but the 10% that it's who are relating to it are really relating to it. I really, really liked this movie. Mm-hmm. I had a lot of fun with it. I only knew it from its cover. There's a VHS cover art coffee table book that I got a while back, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago when it first came out. It's a gorgeous book, and it takes these VHS covers of different genres. And this was under the thriller section. And I remember seeing Enemy Territory, Ray Parker Jr., and being like, and I hadn't made the Empire Pictures connection yet because I wasn't thinking of it in terms of like what it could mean for, something that I would possibly cover on a podcast years later. I just was like, oh, that looked interesting. Yeah. Like, I don't really know anything about that movie. And then some people, when I started talking about the movie, some of the earliest prospective guests were like, oh, I know maybe you're not going to cover it anytime soon, but Enemy Territory is a good one. And I remember it just kind of being there. And this for this show last week was the first time that I really watched it. And it wasn't a movie that I ever saw on like WPIX or anything, although it is sort of the perfect candidate for that movie. But I just was like, man, you know what? This is just a straightforward siege movie with an over-the-top Tony Todd and a bunch of recognizable actors in it. And I just had a real blast with it. And I thought the production value was good. I thought the music was good. And I just have such a soft spot for straightforward cat and mouse siege movies that I had a blast with this. I mean, this might actually, you talked about where it sagged slightly in the middle. I would maybe agree with that a little bit, too much of the same corners and corridors, but like, this one's up there for me. This ranks pretty high among the things we've watched. I think when we kind of review our rankings after episode 100, which we did after episode 50, this will be in my top 25 probably. I mean, I really liked this quite a bit, and I was hoping that you'd have a similar reaction, Steve.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a lot. I think this is a lot of fun. This is a subgenre that I really get into. I like a good, single setting where you understand the geography of the place, and you have colorful villains, and it never gets too heavy or too serious. It's always pretty fun. I had a great time with this one.
But also thinking about how it moves. I mean, if it sags a little bit, like it almost does have a real time feel. Like even though I think it takes place over a course of like 12 hours or something.
Yeah.
It's at sun up at one point, but like it does kind of feel like it's just all happening as we're watching it, and that kind of lends it a little more immediacy and intensity, and it just always it always keeps moving for me. So I was never like bored. I'm not checking my phone. I'm like digging it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I had a great time with it, and we had a great time having you back on the show, Eric. Thank you so much for bringing this one in for us and giving us an excuse to talk about this really fun movie. Oh, yeah. Would you have anything that you're working on you want to direct people towards? Any plugs you'd like to drop here?
I guess, I write a lot of YouTube content for the site joeblow.com. So if you go to their originals or horror originals channels, you'll probably end up watching something I've written.
Great.
And if you go to celebrity interviews, you can watch me interview celebrities. So it's like, just 2 days ago, I interviewed Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore for their.
Wow.
So like, that's my career, is basically like interviewing Tilda Swinton and then watching Enemy Territory and talking to you guys.
Like a Riley, man.
Could be worse.
I love variety. So
yeah.
that's what I'm doing. And then you can find me on X. So even though I'm like really probably leaving there soon, if this is in January, then I most likely have deactivated it. You can find me on Facebook, Eric Walkuski, if you want to chat, and I'm friends with Jared on there. So, thank you guys for having me. And Jared, if you guys want to have me back, you can schedule me now for like 2026 or 2027.
I think we're booked out through 2028. But,
okay, I think so. I would have to look, but I would say 2029 probably.
I plan on still being alive. So.
Yeah, and I would be remiss to say that in the time since Eric was last on the show and is on the show now, my final exam trivia team has finally beaten Suspiria Wallpaper Fetish. We got one.
Big one too, right? Brooklyn Horror Fest.
It was the Brooklyn Horror Fest one,
which is a real tough one.
Yeah, we had probably, and the best part was that a friend of the show, Danny Torkel, past guest, brought his daughter, who will be 14 is 13 currently, 14 when this airs. Her birthday is very soon. She actually was a really big help because the last round was about kids' horror movies.
Yeah.
And it was just really a wonderful timing. And she won the Texas Chainsaw box, which was probably the best prize they've ever given away.
Yeah. That thing looked like it weighed about 30 pounds. So you won it, but like, it would be the kind of thing I'd bring it into my office and I'd be like, where the goddamn hell am I putting this thing?
Right. Danny was like, well, who should we figure out who gets that? I was like, just take it. I don't have room for anything. Right. So as cool as it is, just take it. And but yeah, if you jump onto YouTube and check out any of Eric's writing for Joe Blow or any of the videos that he's worked on, I'm sure that you will love them all. If you like what we do, then you can tell us by jumping onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leaving a 5-star rating, maybe a brief review as well, if you feel so inclined to do so. If you want to keep up with the show, the best way to do it is Instagram. You can follow the show at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jared or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We are no longer on X, but you can find the show on Blue Sky and Threads, and you can listen to audio of it on our YouTube channel for right now. We're trying to beef that up, but it's tough. And Steve has another show that he works on and spends a lot of time on that he would like to plug. So, Steve, what else have you got going on?
Absolutely. I have another show called Cinema Arcade, which is cinema and arcade mashed together. We are talking about movies and then playing the video games based on those movies to see how they contrast, compare. We had a really interesting one recently on Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, a deeply deranged movie and a truly excellent video game. And we're going to be talking about Lemony Snicket's Series of Unfortunate Events pretty soon. We've got some Christmassy stuff coming up. At this point, of course, this is all in the past. But you can find all of that and then whatever else we're up to at this point. I'm not really sure.
What are we up to next week?
Oh, God damn it. Everybody brace yourselves, all right? Because next week we are pulling a major Band-Aid, at least for me. We are talking about the entire Baby Oopsie trilogy, a series of movies, 3 of them to be clear, based on my least favorite character in the entire Full Moon canon. I'm going to be a little grouchy, so I'm going to get a little drunk and silly for that episode, I think. And that out, because... I'm not looking forward to watching these, but we do have a really fun guest lined up to watch me squirm. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I think it's going to be great because honestly, like some of the things that we've gone into sort of dreading the conversation, whether it be like Ouija's or Ginger Weed Man and stuff like that, we're able to turn into some really fun episodes. So I think it's going to be a good time. I think you just got to rip that Band-Aid off and you're going to find something to enjoy. And if you can't, then just get really drunk and just be really sassy and bitchy, and it'll make for some good radio.
That's what Baby Oopsie Daisy is, right? Sassy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out next week if Steve can walk, talk, and shit his pants. In the meantime, thank you to Eric Walkuski for joining us again, and thank you to all of you for listening week to week. We will see you next time for our self-proclaimed Baby Oopsie Palooza.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
luck.